I'm going to speak very briefly just to introduce our two speakers who will then talk about the wonderful work that they do. So Lara Wilson, to my right, is the Director of Special Collections and University Archivist at the University of Victoria, British Columbia. She has held various appointments in the University of Victoria Library since 2001. She holds a Master of Arts, Art History and Visual Studies from the University of Victoria and a Master of Archival Studies from the University of British Columbia. She has twice served as President of the Archives Association of British Columbia, is past chairperson of the Canadian Council of Archives, and is presently serving on the boards of the Access to Memory Foundation as chair and the National Archival Appraisal Board Director BC and Northern Canada region. And Lara has been such a wonderful collaborator. I came here to this university, a year and a half ago, and has invited so many of my classes into the archives to learn about the performance collections here. So I'm continually thankful.
Thank you.
For your collaborative spirit. Jim Hoffman, to my left, is a professor emeritus at Thompson Rivers University, is a theatre historian with a special interest in British Columbia theatre. He has donated 2 collections of theatre materials to the University of Victoria, 1 collection to the University of Calgary, and has published, so widely on topics related to British Columbia theatre. So I'm so excited to have Jim here collaborating with Lara to talk about performance collections in the UVIC archives, to talk about Jim's experiences getting materials also into these archives. So please join me in thanking them for the contribution.
Thank you, Sasha. I am going to start our event this afternoon. I'd like to begin by saying all of us who work here at UVIC Libraries are honored to be guests on the land of the Lekwungen people. The Songhees Esquimalt and Wasanich, whose relationships to the land continue to this day. My family have been uninvited guests here since the 1940s and are from the Stoney tribe and Kwakwaka'wakw territories after immigration from Scotland, Ireland, and England. I bring greetings from our university librarian, Jonathan Bankston, who conveys his best wishes for the symposium and the research meetings. So thank you for joining us today in our Special Collections and University Archives classroom. This is one of 2 which adjoin our reading room, so we came here through the reading room. This part of the building was built in 2007, so we're very fortunate to be in a new part of this facility. In these spaces, faculty, students, visiting researchers, and community members, along with our archivists and librarians, engage in instruction and objects-based learning sessions with our rare and unique materials. As a unit of UVIC libraries, Special Collections and University Archives are guided by the 3 principles of our strategic directions, which are open, engaged, and enduring. And I'd like to acknowledge Jackie Thompson here, our Special Collections and Archives assistant, who has assisted Jim in his projects. And Jackie has brought out some materials to take away, including our open, engaged, and enduring library stickers and some of our publications as well. So our holding services and professional and technical team support these directions. So thank you again for coming. My role in this afternoon is to provide a brief overview of our history and collections before Jim will discuss his work in archives and those of theatre energy, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this. So a little bit about the University of Victoria. It was established as an independent degree-granting university in 1963, but it was preceded by Victoria College, which was established in 1903. And Vic College, as it was fondly known, was a college originally of Montreal's McGill University and then later the University of British Columbia. Victoria College was housed in various locations around Victoria, if you're familiar with Victoria, including the historic Victoria High School and the former home of Cole Baron Robert Dunsmuir Craigdarroch Castle. So it was during the years of Victoria College that the core of our special collections was established. And it was largely the result of acquisition activities of Professor Roger Bishop, who was the head of the English department from 1945 and 1967. And the stories of special collections and history, or theater histories, overlap here. Bishop urged the administration, the college administration, to have a budget for books. And in the summer times, he eventually was able to travel internationally to build the rare book collection. As well, his contributions to the establishment of the theater department are well known and are recognized in the university's 208-seat proscenium theater, which is called the Roger Bishop Theater. He was a supporter of UVIC throughout his lifetime in many ways and during his retirement. And he passed away a few years ago, just a couple of weeks short of his 100th birthday. But his philanthropy continued beyond his lifetime through estate gifts, and among these gifts are the Ailsa and Roger Bishop Entrance Scholarship in theater for undergraduate students, and also a fund for special collections. So, a little bit more about our holdings. Our holdings are wide-ranging, both in theater and in other areas. Our UVIC Special Collections was officially formed in the late 1960s, and the University Archives in 1974. And in those days, there was sort of an agreement amongst the research institutions with special collections in British Columbia to collect in certain areas. So UVIC specialized in English and Anglo-Irish literature, and special collections holds materials related to Irish drama, including materials from former faculty member Anne Saddlemeyer and her research on Lady Gregory and W.B. Yeats and the Yeats family and Abbey Theatre. We also hold the Margaret Hollingsworth Phone, which includes manuscripts, drafts, and notes of stage and radio plays. And these are just some examples. And I know I've overlooked a few things, I'm sure, that should be mentioned, so my apologies. So over the decades, our collections have grown not only in theater but in other areas. So in addition to our rare print materials across the Library of Congress classifications, we have archival holdings of over 1,000 archival phone collections. So that may be one item, or it may be, 20 meters of material. So as you can appreciate, you have to be a bit of a generalist to do this work here. Because in addition to theater, we collect in military history, local history, environmentalism, environmental science, anarchist studies, gender studies, arts and culture, it goes on. So archives related to theater are found in our institutional records holdings, they're in faculty archives, and in archival donations from persons and organizations in the community. As Jim and I were discussing this session, I did a keyword search of our accessions database. So this is an internal database where we manage our holdings. And I did a keyword search on theater, and I got over 70 results of different accessions that relate to theater. Again, it might be very broadly about theater, or maybe just a few items, but that gives you an idea of the scope of the material. Like many archives in Canada, our collections are in different stages of processing. Oftentimes, Jim and I were talking about this, the importance of a research interview, a research sort of discussion at first when you come into our department, if you want to do more research, is helpful because some of the material is not fully described. Some phone collections we have, I'll just mention, about 8. Obviously, the records of the theater department here at UVIC, Company 1 Theater Society, Wild Horse Summer Theater Company, the New Bastion Theater, records of Peter Mannering and Stuart Baker, the John Critch and Harvey Miller collection, Langham Court Theatre, Carl Hare, and Kaleidoscope Theatre. So this is some of the material that we have, specifically relating to activities in this region. So I'll list a little bit and then I'll hand it over to Jim. In 2013, Jim donated his archives relating to his career and his BC theatre history research, and generally assisted us in its organization. And recently, Jim has lent his subject matter expertise to the organization and description of the Theatre Energy Fund, which we received from Penny Haggerty at Thompson Rivers University in 2015 through our connection with Jim. So these materials are out here today for Jim to refer to and for you to have a look at. And with that, I pass it over to Jim.
Thank you. Nice description. Well, I think my little spiel today and a little bit of time that we have, I feel a bit like a salesperson. You know, I'm going to market something and talk about very practical things. I mean, that session we just had was wonderfully cerebral and thoughtful and important, I think, in what's going on in our studies. But I'm going back in time because I've done a lot of research in BC theatre history for some time now, 3 decades. And I know when I first started the, which is now called Theatre Research in Canada, that organization used to be called Canadian Theatre History in Canada. Theatre History in Canada, thick. Remember? Anybody was? Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. It was thick. Now it's trick. In those days, when it began, it was we just collected data. Basically, I think we scholars who were starting the whole business were proving, my gosh, we had a theatre history. There are documents galore. There is stuff out there. We can say things about them. They existed. Did you know that was there? Did you know that was there? It wasn't nothing. It was something. And we kept proving that until the day, I think, 6, 7 years later, theory kind of arrived. Remember, they used to call the Learneds, right? I remember the Learneds one time with my colleagues having coffee, and they were upset. These are older people, and they were older scholars, and they were kind of upset. Oh, what's all this theory coming in? We're just trotting out history, and just tell it like it is. I think the issue that we were being asked to consider canons and canonicity, pretty heavy-duty stuff, right? And that was being laid on us suddenly. You know, consider that when you do papers and all this, and there was concern about that. So I remember that moment of, what are they doing to us? But anyway, yeah, my interest in BC theatre I think was sparked by a biggie. I did my PhD at NYU, and I knew I wanted to study a playwright. I wanted a Canadian, not a small playwright, but someone pretty major. So I picked George Riga, late 70s. So anyway, I did my dissertation on George Riga, and which turned out eventually to my you might know me through this book, biography of George Riga, which my dissertation turned into a full-fledged, more or less, biography. And of course, he's famous for Rita Joe, right? Here's the original poster. Trivia question: who knows? Who did that? Famous artist in BC did that poster.
Oh, this the same one who did.
Anybody know?
Morrison?
Jack Shadbolt.
Jack Shadbolt.
Oh.
Big BC, probably one of the biggest names, certainly at the time.
Huh.
That's his poster of Rita Jones. A lot of cool stuff when you get into this. So yeah, I got interested in BC history via George. All the work on George, and we were sitting one day in his patio in Summerland. I spent many a weekend in Summerland doing hours of interviews, constant interviews, taping for the book, and talking to the family as well. And one day we're sitting in the patio, and George says, "Oh, look across Lake Okanagan. See that farm there, that farmhouse? A guy used to live there, he's dead now, who ran a theater, an up-to-date theater company there. He had a theater and everything." I thought, really? Yeah, I think his name was Carol Akins.
Oh.
Carol Akins, yeah, there it was. And I got, really? So I got hopping on that. And my first big academic article was on Carol Akins, in the home theater. He ran a state-of-the-art theater in an apple orchard in the Okanagan. And I mean, who knew? It was quite a story, quite a story. big influences. He knew big names. He had big names coming up to look at what he was doing. And he ran a theater school. Students from across Canada came and trained, did shows. Lasted 2 or 3 years. Then quit. So, my interest in BC theater, article. Oh yeah, some publications, Canadian Theatre Review, have had whole publications on BC theater. There's one, 1984. And I have an article there on, can you go forward? Yeah. That's an article on theater energy, a company in the Kootenays where I lived for a while. And many of you will perhaps know the BC Studies article, more recent, the whole edition of BC Studies on BC theater. And I was asked by Jerry Wasserman, when this was being planned, to write something on BC theater. And could I mention the major works on BC theater, major writings on BC theater. So basically I covered, I think, almost all of them. So this is an important piece of writing on BC theater. It's in that article pretty well, and contextualized. And now the story of, I want to focus on theater, and I have to hurry because time is going to go quickly. The theater energy story, when I was living in the Kootenays for 5 years, teaching university there, for UVIC, there's a company called Theater Energy. How many have heard of Theater Energy? Wow, what? Interesting. It's one of Canada's important collective theater companies. And there's 4 or 5 books on collective creation in Canada. 4 or 5? And I've checked them all. The index, the chapters, not one mention of theater energy. And yet they were pretty important, I think. So anyway, when I was living in the Kootenays in Nelson, I saw quite a few of their shows, got to know some of the people in the company, and was quite proud of what they were doing. What they were doing was collectively creating shows about people in the Kootenays, about their own people. Their idea was to do experimental, professional theater, telling the stories of the people around them, the land around them, the history around them, and show it to the same people. They toured around. A very simply staged performance thing they did. That was one of that's actually their first show called Renderings, 1976. And that's the company. There were 8 original members. Their names are down here. They're all, if you know much about the Slocan Valley, it's kind of an idyllic, rural, small farm area in BC where a lot of back to the land people came, especially in the 60s and 70s, the kind of sort of hippie era. And pretty well all these people here, many are from the States, parts of Canada, and they came to the Slocan Valley to kind of go back to the land, to settle, to get their hands up in the soil, to work, live a simpler life perhaps, a more direct life, a connected life. And they formed a company, to make a long story short, with these 8 people, called Theater Energy, because in that area, people had, I've got energy for farming, I've got energy for animal raising, I've got animal for gardening, raising family. These people had energy for theater, and that was their contribution to community. Very connected to their community. So away they went. Oh yes, the story of how I got the funds. I had a connection with members of the company. There was only one member of the company who lasted to the end. They lasted to the early 90s, about 20 years roughly. And Judith Ciroli, right there, Judith Ciroli, was the only one who, she was from the States originally, she's the only one who lasted the full length. Others came and went. And she remained, she did everything. She acted, she directed, she wrote, she designed, she stage managed, she did props, toured with them, organized tours. And she also kept a wonderful collection of all their papers. So when I went to see her, she said, oh, I have all these papers out in the shed out back. What it was 2 big boxes, wooden boxes, 6 feet long, each of them, stacked with files. They're all there now, those boxes. There's 10 boxes here. A gold mine of their stuff. All drafts of scripts, correspondence, photographs, reviews, previews, financial records galore, applications for funding, payroll, equity correspondence, you name it. It's all there. It's a huge. I'm just going through it. I've done a quick reading already of the collective plays they did. It's about 16, 17. Now I'm going back to the beginning and reading through again. But first of all, I had to deal with a problem. When I got the materials, I worked at Thompson Rivers University, a new university in Kamloops. They had a kind of what they call special collections, but it wasn't really. It was just a room. And the archivist, the librarian, said, Jim, I'd love to keep that kind of stuff, but we don't really have the personnel, the atmosphere, the room. Mm-hmm. So I kind of made, and I had this, Judith Ciroli was offering me the materials to put it in a repository. I said I would. So I went and collected them in my pickup truck, drove them to Thompson Rivers, and basically dumped them on the library's doorstep under a cover, in a door, like a foundling, a little baby for you. And then I called her up and said, you know that collection we talked about, you might take if you can, and maybe if you can find a room. Well, it's here. It's on your doorstep. So they did take it. We kept saying, I'd love to do more with it. We'd love to. We can't really keep it. Went on for a couple of years like that. Then I left the university, retired, came to Victoria. That's when the conversation started between Penny Haggerty, the archivist there, and Lara Wilson here. And they agreed to move the whole collection here because they were happy to have it here. Hooray for them. So I've given my my own archives, my own fonts, BC history. It's here in these, I think it's the 4 boxes, right? Yeah, the 4 boxes, that's my stuff. Covers, and if you're interested in seeing what's in there, the fonts are all listed here. And if you want to see it online, just go to the UVIC Library website, the basic website where you search for a book. Just type in James Hoffman fonts. That's all. And then this thing comes up. You can see all the stuff that's there, from Aboriginal theatre right through all kinds of BC theatre companies, directors, names, playwrights. There's quite a lot of stuff there. And the now the theatre energy stuff. Now there's the first page of the listing of that fonts, and it became a problem. In a way, a happy problem, but a challenging problem. Because when it arrived here, and I started looking at it, it's been put in boxes very nicely, all nicely file folded and well organized, it looked like. But when you look at it carefully, they're a collective theater company, which means they didn't do just one script. In fact, I think true blue collective theater companies, they pride themselves on not having a finished, literary, perfect script. They want to stay flexible, they want to stay up to date, they keep changing things, and they have drafts. And people come and go as well who have certain skills. So if a certain person that did a certain dance or something or a speech leaves the company, someone else comes in, can't do it anymore, so you change it. A lot of that made it hard for them to plan their seasons because they were so staying up to date. And often they would take a play from last year and revise it for this year, or adapt it, shorten it, adapt it for a school tour, that kind of thing. So this is going on. So what you'll find in the fonts here for their company is a lot of drafts of plays, especially the second one, Voices. You'll see a lot of, where are we? The next one? Voices, yeah, Voices is up there. There's about 7 or 8 files with drafts of Voices. And there's some difference, some variation, but there it is. And when you look it over, it's great, lots of stuff there. You think, was there a final? If I was going to publish that play, would there be one publishable, perfect version? Well, that's problematical. The other problem was when we first looked at this collection, I was kind of horrified to find that a lot of these scripts were spread around different boxes. So for example, voices, you'd find a couple of voices files in box 1, a couple in box 3, a couple in box 5, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, if I'm a researcher, that'd drive me crazy, shouldn't they all be together? I found that was pretty rampant. There was kind of a random, haphazard organization of the whole thing. So, had a good talk with Lara about this. She agreed it was a problem. But I wrestled a wee bit with, I'm no archivist. It seems to me when papers come from a collection, they're fonds. And I think fonds mean that they're a private collection by an institution or a person. And the assumption is their organization is significant.
Right.
The fact that this file comes before that was after that one, is meaningful.
Right.
So dare I intervene and rampage through and just change everything? Well, we did. And
Yeah, those of you who are familiar with archives know that sometimes you get a phone and there's been a lot of disruption to it. So if there wasn't a meaningful original order,
yeah,
there have been a number of people involved, and maybe it's physical housing. So we felt that lending some coherence would make it more accessible. So.
Made sense to me because I was trying to, I've dealt with a lot of students doing research in theater history, numerous, and I was thinking a typical student of mine coming to research this stuff would really help him or her if things were, all the voices, scripts were put together.
Yeah.
Maybe chronologically if you can, ideally. If you can't, just put it together anyway. Made sense.
Yeah.
But now the archivists had a really good idea. They said, yeah, they bought into it, and we did it. And Jackie there did most of the legwork. I spent quite a bit of time reorganizing all the files. It took me quite a while. I gave her the list, and she's the one that actually put them, and rewriting a lot of the file names too. Big job. One thing we did, which I think was really clever of who's Jackie or Lara, I'm not sure, but after each entry, here's one here. See that? Okay, this one here. 2.9 correspondence, 78, 79, correspondence, 346, 345. That's the old original numbering.
So that was Jackie bringing that forward.
Yeah, which I think is a really good idea. If you'll notice, if you look at the voices, what are there, 14 or so voices files, they've come from, I think, 6 boxes. If you look at the numbers,
Oh, right.
see the first number in those square brackets, that's the box they came from. So that's basically 14 files from 6 boxes, which I think is doing a favor to researchers. But we do have the numbers of the original boxes and the file number they were in. So it became really important to a researcher that I need to know what was the original order after that file, because I think it's important. Well, hey, now we can tell them. So I'm mentioning, I think, Jackie, you mentioned that these would go out eventually. When we're all finished, we make those all disappear.
But I think keeping them would be...
Probably keeping them would be important, because then if somebody wanted to know the original order from the company, they would have it.
Yeah.
Good thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the way we're leaning right now, I would suggest. Like a lot of research in BC theater that I've done, this is not a gold mine. We've got 10 boxes of everything you could ever want to know about. There's programs, there's posters, there's photographs, lots of photographs, there's reviews galore. I'm going through it in much more detail for a second major reading. Just stunned by what I'm finding. Wonderful stuff. So, to me, a gold mine.
Jim, do you want to talk a little bit more about your archives?
Yeah.
Where do you think people could go with
Well, I covered a lot of territory, all the way from fairly major work in Aboriginal, First Nations theatre. I've done some work there. In fact, the first file of my funds here is Aboriginal theatre. So quite a few things there. I've covered a lot of, especially interior. I mean, whoever studies interior, little companies, like the Carol Akins Theatre. That was an important thing to talk about, I think. Did you know there was a theatre school also in Victoria at the same time? Victoria had a theatre school that lasted through the 1920s, run by a guy called Major Boyd Webster. Very much a British West End actor who come to Canada, a bit of a remittance man. He ran a theatre school, a bit of a colonizing thing, but it happened. I was in Victoria for 10 years. I've done an article on that. So, and all the papers and research materials for that, founding documents, all part of my files. I've done quite a bit of work on what I'm calling BC's first play. I claim to have made the discovery of BC's first play. There you go. I just declared it. Therefore, it's true. No one's challenged it yet. Long story short, I theorized that maybe if you know BC theatre history period, there was a controversy around 1790 in Nootka Sound. Nootka Sound was one of our first major ports. British were trading there, Spanish were trading, Russians, even Americans, trading ships were coming there for otter pelts and lumber and all kinds of things. The British and the Spanish came to loggerheads when the Spanish arrested two or three British ships laden with cargo, took their crew down to a Mexican fort in Southern California. It caused a major uproar in London. They were threatening to go to war with Spain with that. The Nootka Sound controversy was huge. I had several sabbaticals where I went to London and studied pretty extensively at the British Library mainly, also the Public Record Office. The British Library, I read a whole year's London newspapers from cover to cover, looking for anything to do with Nootka Sound. I found a lot of comments on Nootka Sound. There were books written on Nootka Sound. I'm thinking, wow. At the same time, Britain was arming for war. They were allocating millions to arm for war warships, getting warships ready to fight the Spaniards in Nootka Sound. So I thought, wait a minute, all that kerfuffle, there must have been a play on in London about Nootka Sound, because those were the days when major news events like the killing of Wolfe at Quebec, the fall of the Bastille, were staged on London stages in big kind of scenic, extravaganzas, panoramas, and acted and sung. And so I theorized there must have been a play about Nootka Sound because that was such a big deal. So I did a big search in the manuscripts room of the British Library, which is hard to get into. And one day, wow, I'll never forget that moment, 2 o'clock one day, I found it. I was looking at a list of plays that the British censor, the British censor at that time had to have copies of all plays, handwritten copies of all plays to be approved, or censored, or cut, and that was good because his name was John Larkin. The Larkin collection is a collection of all the plays done in London, handwritten, passed to him in good condition, and just stored away. And the Larkin collection, there was Nootka Sound, or Britain Prepared. So I got it sent to me and looked at it, my God, there it was. A play about BC in 1790, staged at Covent Garden, no less. And not just once or twice, but several times, then the year after. It changed its name, I noticed, but it was the same play. So that to me is a big event. So I've been calling out BC's first play and giving papers on it. And it's true. Okay.
Wow.
First colonial.
Yeah. And so all my research materials for that is quite a bit there are part of my files. Also done articles on the New Play Center in Vancouver, recent New Play Center. I've done a big major article on that. I can't remember half of them.
there more to cover in particular? Because I wonder also if we might open it up to some questions as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think people would be,
Sure.
would be really.
Sure, I think I've done my. One more thing I want to mention about my collection. I'm quite proud of this. In this same issue, Canadian Theatre Review of 1984, there was an article on theatre energy. In the same edition up front, it's really fun to read it now. Yeah, there it is. Little box down here. I look at it fondly. 1984, I was proposing a BC Theatre Conference. And I was starting to set it up. I was getting people together, important people that I thought would be leaders in that. There's the announcement. I announced the BC Theatre Conference. Trouble was, only months later, the institution I was teaching at shut down. The BC government closed the whole place down. I was out of work.
Yeah.
So I had to phone them up and say, there's no conference, folks. There's no institution, I'm out of work. So. However, I didn't let the dream die because at Thompson Rivers University in 1999, I did it. We had BC's first academic theatre conference, staging the Pacific Province. There's the poster for it. And it was a big success. Like, scholars from across Canada, playwrights galore. We had panels, papers.
What year was that, Jim?
Pardon me?
What year?
1999. Yeah, here it is. Great success. We had so much fun. And all the papers are in my phones. All the papers are there. I'm a great person for documenting, so I had everything videotaped. So everyone who gave a paper, every playwright who read, is videotaped. They're in the fonts here. So you can watch them if you want to. And all the founding documents and correspondence is all there. And the exciting part of that for me at the end, in our final session on the Saturday, we were winding up about 3 o'clock. And I was thinking, gee, what next? And kind of two hands went up in the audience. The head of theater at UVIC and the head of English got the hands and said, we want the next one at UVIC. So 2 years later, UVIC had BC Theatre History Conference #2, and there's their poster. Another great success. And again, I've got some paper. I was on that committee too, of course, and there's some pictures there in my phones. So any researcher wanting to check all that stuff out, it's there. And to end that story a bit, I'd hope to have a third one at, guess where? UVIC. I thought, of course, UVIC should be next. The big university, the whole Vancouver Island, stories to tell. I did a bit of backstage maneuvering, a couple of meetings down here, because I was traveling from Kamloops. But it didn't ever really gel or couldn't get picked up on it. So here we are 19 years later. This has never been a third. So, but we still live in hope.
Yeah, and I think I see some people itching to ask questions, Jim, because so much of what you're doing is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see,
I have a question.
I see Yuri, so yeah, go ahead.
Yuri.
So it's a question for both, but I just wanted to speak with Laura about your advice in terms of how to create from out of these fonts and out of these archives. How would one create, a discussion with the folks that may or may not be alive? But we're looking at a time period where I know UBC has kind of a 100-year clause where people are not alive and you can kind of discuss their.
Okay.
So I'm just curious about how we build history and how we talk about it, building from what we know here, without speculating, right? And so how would you recommend a researcher go into this material and try to make sense of that?
Well, I mean, my thought is go in with your set some of your expectations aside, because I know from my time before I became an archivist, but I was working in archives, but the unexpected connections you will find in the material. I mean, you just have to get into it. That's the place to start, because you will find connections, you will see areas of inquiry that you didn't anticipate at all. Yeah. I mean, that's one way to start. In terms of what kind of research outputs you anticipate, or was your question also about access and privacy? Yeah. Jim and I have talked about, identifying access restrictions. So the theater energy, Jim and I have to have more discussion about that. But certainly, in terms of private records, which is what these are, there are different standards and different pieces of legislation that apply to that. So we do have the tool of a research agreement that one can use to, if we identify access restrictions. So that enables researchers to use the material while still respecting the privacy of the individual information. So
I should mention that Judith Ciroli, who gave me that theater energy collection, was thrilled to do that. Thrilled it's going to a proper repository. I've also kept her in touch with what we're doing, this kind of intervention. She's thrilled. She's nice letter saying, wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing this. So she's on side. She's part of the best authority, the only member of the company that stayed put and was one long-time member. The only one. She's still working. Most aren't.
So in an age of non-materiality, the period that has exploded upon us from the mid-2000s and aughts to now, what is the archive prepared to do, or how is the archive able to receive material that is digital?
well, I'm fortunate that we are a unit of the library, and so I can draw on expertise from outside of special collections and archives. And that includes our colleagues in digital scholarship and strategy, for instance.
Okay.
And also I have colleagues here in special collections and archives who are have expertise in digital preservation. So you basically need, in order to receive digital
You need
material,
digital space.
we need digital space. Space is becoming cheaper, but it's that management over time, and to have a digital preservation system which you identify, normalize, check your digital files,
Right.
make them accessible, and continue that management over time. So we have a digital preservation framework document that we've developed here in the library.
That's recent too, isn't
Yes,
it?
that is. We have a software service called Archivematica. So Archivematica is a product. The lead developer is Artifactual Systems in Westminster. They also are the lead developer of Access to Memory, which is our archival description database software.
Okay.
So there are services and software out there that help us with that. It does take a long time to ramp up to a fully functional digital intake process. And so we're not really there yet, but my colleagues are working on it. In fact, I have a colleague who's on study leave right now, and that's what she's working on, is our internal process for accepting digital.
What's your
archive.
timeline on that? Says somebody who has an extensive digital collection.
Okay. Well, I mean, we are running Archivematica now,
Okay.
but it's in terms of identifying what our workflow is going to be, how we work in the library. Her study leave is, she'll be done at the end of June, and we'll bring back.
So you're looking maybe at a 2 to 5 year window?
Yeah. That's
Realistically.
typical for a lot of, I know this from my Archives Association work, is that it usually takes several years for an institution to build its capacity.
Mhm.
Once they say, okay, we're doing it. You know, people have to be trained on the software and so forth. But we're still, sorry, we're still, you have digital archives. We're still dealing though with the wave of analog archives from the 20th century.
Yeah,
It's still.
I know. It's.
Yeah.
It must be an archivist's absolute nightmare.
Well,
Not at
we've
all.
been thinking and working and doing research on preservation of authentic digital records for decades in the archival community.
Yeah.
It's building the capacity for the institution to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Is the big thing, because that's a big shift.
You know, I wonder about things like media issues, like I mentioned those first BC Theatre History Conference. Videotape, we did videotape everything, and they're all there.
Yeah.
But those are 20-year-old videotapes now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to have a shelf life that's going to diminish, right? They might not be that good anymore, even now.
So working, like I was thinking about that today, identifying Jim's AV for digitization.
Yeah.
And digitization is becoming more and more, I think, reasonable in terms of cost. But then once you have that digital file, it's the management over the lifetime.
Well, and the lifetime of our digital records, particularly audio and CDs, DVDs, is shortening. Every new one that comes out, the time period before it corrupts.
I've got something like 36 interviews with important BC theatre people, many of whom now have passed away.
Yeah.
And they're gold, levels of great tapes, like Sidney Risk and Everyman Theatre. Beautiful interview with him that I taped a week before he died.
Yeah.
He was on his deathbed, literally, but he was wonderful. Anyway, things like that, audio tapes, you know, cassette tapes, they're not going to last.
I could talk a lot about some of our experiences with AV here. It's been quite good in terms of other materials we've digitized. But still, interestingly, the most valuable thing that you can produce out of managing that AV asset is a transcript.
Yes.
Like in terms of access.
Yes.
Having a transcript
Thank you.
increases its accessibility, its research value.
Yeah.
So there's nothing too fancy about that. You just need somebody to do that work.
Yeah.
There used to be talk of machines that could automatically transcribe.
Yeah, and there's you can do that from a digital file.
Yeah.
But you still have to do that quality control.
Yeah.
They barely work for speech.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's financial, it's resources and finances and time, right? Yeah.
What does FONS mean? Does that refer to any?
Phone
anything
is
comes
sorry,
under
yeah, it's FONDS. It's the whole of the records created or received and set aside by a person or organization in the course of their activity.
Like a theatre company, keeping their records, like Theatre Energy, or
So-
my own personal collection.
And part of that too, that in that definition, is that important piece of and set aside. So there will be necessarily silences in the records because somebody has chosen not to keep something. I mean, you can speculate, did they receive it? Can you prove that they maybe did receive it, but they didn't retain it? But those choices that the creator, so the person who is creating and receiving the records, so Jim Hoffman or Theatre Energy, there might be something there because you know enough. It's like, no, I'm not seeing anything about this.
Yeah.
And so the silences exist because that's life, right?
An issue I want to raise before we finish is it bugs me quite often when I think of archives that I've given to universities and working here a lot. It's all well and good, and people like Lara and Jackie are super cooperative, great to work with. And we're doing great work, I think. But I'm thinking, who's going to know it's here? The whole business of publicizing, getting it out of the archives into public awareness, and animating it in different ways. Probably we could have a whole conversation on that. How do you animate an archival collection that sits so quietly in boxes in the back, and who knows it's there?
The people who have a hunger.
Yeah, but even people that need to create a hunger, who don't know they have hunger, but once they see it, they'll go, hey, I'm interested now. You know?
Yeah.
But unless they see it, unless it comes to them in some fashion, they'll never know it exists, so they won't have that hunger. Yeah, Alana?
Well, that's a wonderful segue because tomorrow one of our sessions is about how archival material has been animated by artists.
Great.
People like Danette and her company, or Kathy will talk about, I don't know what you'll talk about. Kathy's been involved in artist residencies in archives, and Lara, just at some point maybe we can have a chat about could we have theater students and residents in the archives animating the archives through performance.
It's the generative. My colleague Heather Bean and I talk about the generative archive, right? So, archival materials generating more artworks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have time for this? I just wondered, in terms of that shift in the capacity and resources of tech needed to properly manage digital material, am I correct in thinking that it's actually sort of a thing that's in Canada amongst universities in that?
I can't be sure, but I know things like our digital preservation framework document is out there. It's available on our website. We have something called a grants menu, which is available for researchers and faculty, and it sets out how we can collaborate and the costs associated with these sorts of things. We have a number of universities have digital scholarship commons, which are up here on the third floor. I do think in terms of our outreach around those things, we have a good reputation. I think.
I'm just trying to figure out what's.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there are bigger institutions that maybe have more research dollars coming in, but even today, in special projects, but today a colleague, our Grants and Awards librarian, Christine Wald, talked about how the libraries have been involved in grant-funded projects in the last 5 years. And the numbers are quite impressive in terms of libraries, archivists, librarians, and our technical support people being actively involved in research projects, in generating research, and not just being folks who provide access. So we have things like our publications. So we have some publications on that back table. Those publications are about our rare and unique collections, our goal. We haven't done one in theater yet, but we certainly could. Our goal is to do about one of those a year. So we've done one on the transgender archives. Our most recent one is the artist archives, which are about visual artists, and modernism, our literary modernism collections. So I do know from talking to folks across Canada that we have a very high profile in this area. So
Well, maybe we'll conclude on that note.
Okay.
Sounds like a good place to join me, please, in thanking. It's so great, actually. I'm picking up also on posters a great deal after seeing Yuri's presentation and this presentation now. The significance actually of the graphic material, and I think we'll come back to that maybe tomorrow when we hear something from Theater SCAM and also some of the colleagues that have worked with SCAM as well. So I think we'll see a lot of kind of moving forward and backwards as through some of these conversations.